Hello, young scholars. This is Mr. Martirone, and welcome to World Cultures. So for starters, we're going to be using OER's Big History Project. Our course is entitled the Origins Course, and our course will be arranged into 7 units or eras. Our course begins literally with the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, and we go all the way up to modern day. In Era 1, you'll be introduced to the skills and content of our course. And you'll be introduced in particular to our history frame. Our first frame is communities. How have communities changed over time? How are we organized in society? Our second frame are networks. How do we interact with each other? And finally, there's production and distribution. P&D simply means how do we make things? How do we consume things? How do we produce things? And how we distribute our goods and services around the globe. Additional skills we'll be building on this year include our close read skills, our contextualization skills, our causation skills, and how do we look at and evaluate change and continuity over time. In Era 2, we'll focus on how humans learned how to think, speak, organize, and begin to migrate around the globe. We'll also examine why some people learn how to farm and how farming transformed the future of mankind. By the time we arrive in Era 3, most of our farming villages have evolved into major metropolitan cities. In fact, most of the world's population lived in cities around Afro-Eurasia. Around this time, we see the development of poly and monotheistic religions, and we begin to see the world begin to organize their first governments. By the end of Era 3, villages have evolved into cities, and cities have evolved under central control, known as empires. Era 4 covers the major transformations of the world, especially as the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty collapse. This era, we're going to examine why some empires decline, collapse, and fall. We'll also take a look at how some empires decline and recover more quickly than others, and we'll look at how that recovery and change might not be evenly spread out as many people think. Era 5 is the first global age and marks a turning point in world history. Our story begins with the Renaissance in the Italian city-state of Florence. The Renaissance was a cultural movement that began in late medieval Europe and was a rebirth of ideas going back to the classical ages of Greece and Rome. At the beginning of Era 5, there were only 2 trade networks throughout the world, one in Afro-Eurasia and one in the Americas. That all changed after 1492 when the 2 hemispheric systems were connected as one. And it wasn't only crops and animals that were exchanged. People also moved as a result of this exchange, and not always willingly. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, networks of production and distribution became larger and more complex than ever before. This set the stage for the modern economic system of capitalism. Era 6 begins with the Enlightenment, where intellectual and cultural ideas were introduced and contributed to many political revolutions around the world. And those revolutions were contagious. In 5 short decades from 1775 to 1825, several revolutions in the Americas and Europe brought down the colonial system and European monarchs that had been profiting from it. Perhaps the biggest revolution of this era, the Industrial Revolution, led to one of the most important transformations of human history. This revolution in production and distribution not only changed the way that people produce and distributed goods, but it also led to changes in the way people lived, traveled, and worked. This era also saw the development of 2 competing economic systems, capitalism and socialism. We will also examine how the Industrial Revolution increased humans' demands for the use of fossil fuels as a way for producing energy. In Era 7, we examine the pivotal events of the 20th century that drive most of the narratives of modern history. The First World War, the Great Depression, the rise of fascism and totalitarianism, and how those totalitarian regimes were able to round up and persecute 6.5 million Jews as part of the Holocaust during World War II. We'll understand the sacrifices made by millions of men and women as part of the Second World War. We'll examine the fallout of World War II, which shifted the global balance of power and created a bipolar world between the United States and the Soviet Union. These 2 countries raced to build the most destructive arsenal in history, and this competition caused several terrifying crises and launched the space race. Throughout the 20th century, movements for civil rights and equality emerged. Despite some successes, racism and inequality were unresolved in the generations that followed. We'll end our course by talking about how the world has become more interconnected than ever before. Through globalization, the world has become so connected that local life is shaped by what's happening in other parts of the world. You'll walk away from Error 7 with the understanding that you have power. You can join one of the many international institutions with long-term plans that were created with the goal of making a healthier, fairer, more stable, and peaceful world. Our communities face many of the same problems we did at the start of the 20th century. Genocide, war, and climate change all remain realities today. Perhaps the global communities in our classrooms that we've built can help us solve the global problems we've created. So, young scholars, this class is not so much about the past as it is about our futures. I'm looking forward to an awesome school year with you all. I'm Mr. Martirone, and until class, do something amazing.